All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome. The board has already met in executive session. We've just saluted the flag at that time. We had the pleasure of meeting with our student representatives. Quickly, can I have a roll call, please, Mr. Rillo?
Mr. Salmon?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Ms. Light?
Here.
Ms. Hira?
Here.
Ms. McCune?
Here.
Mr. Molinari?
Here.
Mr. Amin?
Here.
Ms. Chipak?
Here.
And Mr. Rascio?
Here.
Okay, this is a regular meeting of the Board of Education of Berners Township. Notice of the time and place of this meeting was provided, and copies of that resolution were forwarded to the official newspapers as designated by the Board of Education and to the Township Clerk, and a copy of the notice was posted on the bulletin board of the Board of Education offices in accordance with PL 1975, Chapter 231A. The rest is online and in your handouts. There will be two opportunities for public comment. The first will be public comment on agenda items. The second will be public comment on whatever's on your minds. When it's time to speak, please come forward, state your name, sign in, and please keep it to 3 minutes or less. And that will bring us to our student representative, Natalie Ramirez.
Hello everyone, how are you? Once again, student government just wants to say thank you so much for giving your time to us. We had a really productive meeting, and we look forward to speaking more about it in the future. Okay, so first of all, welcome back everyone. I trust you guys all had a great, rejuvenating Thanksgiving break, cherishing moments with family and friends. So going into marking period 2, our Ridge Project Adventure peer leaders bid their students a farewell. We went to transitioning back to our regular gym or health classes. We recently had our second wellness day, a resounding success with humorous performances from our dedicated performing arts students. A special shout out to our senior class student government, laying the groundwork for our upcoming wellness day by doing a competitive talent show for the upperclassmen. They will be competing for prizes, so make sure to mark your calendars for the yearly junior and senior as well as the volleyball tournament at the end of December. It's gonna be great. In sports, our Ridge ice hockey team is looking for Ridge alumni to join an exciting game this Saturday, so please, let's come together to support our talented athletes. The Ridge Drama Club recently delivered its most excellent comedy show ever, showcasing the immense talent within our community. So kudos to them for their outstanding performance. Additionally, our Ridge cheerleading teams, Black and Green, triumphed at the UCA regional competitions, earning spots at nationals in Orlando this February. Dedicated to promoting inclusion, Unified Sports also actively seeks athletes and partners for their upcoming winter, specifically basketball and within the winter, and track within their spring seasons. The boys basketball continues to have their tryouts, and boys wrestling continues to have their practice after school. As we approach winter, so let's embrace this spirit of giving. The Key Club organized a Thanksgiving food drive where all students collected items and it will be sent to the Hillside Food Bank. As we navigate the winter season, remember that each student's hard work and dedication to their respective endeavors. Overall, congrats to the students within the Ridge Choir who did their performance in All-State in Atlantic City and the NJ Pack this weekend. It was also great seeing the Ridge Key Club do their fall performance. Whether you're an athlete, an artist, an academic enthusiast, or simply contributing to the Ridge community in other ways, your efforts are vital. So at times, let's take a moment and honestly ask your child how they're doing. And also remember to follow the Ridge Student Body Government on Instagram to receive more updates on what our students up to. Overall, thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. Anything for our student representative?
Natalie, just wanted to thank you for helping and bringing the student government in. I think that it was very, very helpful, and we got a lot of knowledge out of it, so thank you very much.
Thank you all for being respectful.
Okay, brings us to board president's comments. Not much this evening. I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. It was an absolute pleasure to hear from our student government representatives. A lot of great discussion there. And I'll keep it short because we do have the demographer's report to get to. So we'll move on to that.
Traveling for the holiday?
Okay.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have with us tonight Dr. Richard Grip from Statistical Forecasting. Dr. Grip has been working as the district's demographer for the last few rounds of updates. This is the third time that Dr. Grip has assessed our district demographics, and we use his reporting to help forecast where we're going to be, largely with our enrollments as the key piece of data. So without further ado, Dr. Grip, we look forward to hearing your update.
Thank you. Look forward to presenting. Just before I start, I wanted to ask, so it's been 4 years since I've been here, and I know board members aren't always the same 4 years later. How many board members were here 4 years ago when I was here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, just a few of you. Okay, so tonight what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the report which we just recently submitted last week. And at the end of that presentation tonight, I'll open it up to the board for questions. So just a little bit about our company. We only do what's called school demography work, and we're one of the few companies actually in the New York metropolitan area that does this kind of work, and we've been doing it for the last 25 years. More than 200 school districts in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. We actually do work all the way as far down south as Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of DC. And up into New England, where I live now in Vermont, we do some work up there. And we're the demographic consultant for the New York City Public Schools. We do all their demographic projections, which is kind of interesting. As you've been maybe looking at the news, they have a migrant crisis with some people getting bussed in from all over the place. So that's an interesting part of our work. I'm the executive director. I have a doctor in educational statistics and measurement from Rutgers, not too far away. Most of us wind up working for the College Board in a field called psychometrics, but I decided that I wanted to do a more applied approach. I was a teacher at Bridgewater Raritan, not too far away. I taught physics and statistics there for about 10 years, and while I was there, searching for an idea to do a dissertation, my superintendent told me that if I do something in this thing called school demography, maybe I'll do okay. So yes, I left the teaching profession and went into this. I testify as an expert witness in ALJ hearings where school districts want to divorce from each other, particularly in sending-receiving relationships. So what's the purpose of the study? Well, everyone thinks the purpose of demographic study is to project enrollments, and yes, that's definitely the first bullet point that you see up there. So we projected for the 24-25 school year through 28-29. And it's only a 5-year period. You may say, well, can't you project out maybe 10 years or something like that? The problem is we start having difficulty in the outer years, when I say outer years, 6 to 10, in projecting elementary grades, because now you have to start projecting kids who haven't been born yet. And we can do that for larger places such as New York City, because we look at age-specific fertility rates of women and things like that. But for communities such as yours, which is very small, the error rates are just too large to work with. We also looked at the community's population trends, other demographic characteristics such as race, poverty status, things like that, birth counts, fertility rates. Then we started looking away from the township and went down to the school district level. So we looked at your historical enrollments for the last 10 years, district-wide, elementary, middle, and high school grade configuration, as well as by school. We determined historical birth counts for each of the 4 elementary attendance zones. That's a little tricky, and I'll explain how we did that later. Then we computed what's called student yields. Student yields are a number of students per housing unit, and we did it for your entire housing stock. That would be detached single-family homes, townhouses, and apartments. What's the purpose of that? Well, you have some new housing starts, new housing developments coming online. We can then use those values to project how many kids will come out of those developments. We also research new housing starts by calling the township and finding out what's in the pipeline, what's coming forth. Then we started comparing your building capacities of the 6 schools to the actual enrollments now and the projected enrollments in 5 years to see if you'll have surplus seating or inadequate seating. And the final thing we did, which is a pretty complex analysis, we projected your enrollments in a completely different way using your housing stock and what's called a housing turnover analysis. It was something put together by my colleagues out in Cal Berkeley. They came up with this methodology, and I'll explain a little bit that further. But it's a completely independent analysis, and you cannot compare the projections from that with those of the more common methodology used called the cohort survival ratio method. So the first thing you'll see tonight is a graph showing the population in Bernards from 1940 up to 2020, which is the vertical line you see in the middle there, or the right side. And then that point that's hanging out on the right-hand side is your projected population in 2050 by a third-party organization called the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. So everything to the left of the vertical line is from the census. So in 2020, your population is 27,830. Don't believe that in 20 years or 27 years that your population is only going to go up by 200 people. That's because that value you see on the far right is based on some old data from 2017. So this agency, the NJTPA, will probably revise that number upwards once it takes about 2 years for them to do all their calculations. So who are you as a community? You are a changing community. I've been here since 2017, so it's been 6 years. In 2020, you're about 65% white, about a quarter 24% Asian, and about 6% Hispanic. If you look at how that change is compared to 2010, you have a declining white population and an increase in Asian population. The median age is about 5.5 years older than that in New Jersey. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Foreign-born population is very similar to New Jersey, about 22.5%. India and China are the largest sources, and both of those countries' foreign-born populations have been increasing pretty significantly since 2010. This is an incredibly educated community. To see bachelor's degree or higher, almost 3/4 of the population up there, you can see that's much higher than that of the state. Very high household income, a median of $160,000, which is $70,000 higher than the state. And again, for those who forgot statistics, median is not an average, it's not the mean, it's the 50th percentile, which means half of the incomes are above 160 and half of them are below. There's almost 11,000 housing units, of which about 78% are one-unit homes that could be a detached single-family home or a townhouse. 18% roughly of the homes are renter-occupied, which is much lower than that of the state, and the median value of an owner-occupied unit is $675,000. So again, that's just a little bit of a snapshot of who you are. It's also helpful for me to see who you are. So here's all the locations of the schools that we have. You can see there's the high school where we are tonight. So that's the shape of your township. I'll try to talk into the mic and not turn around, but occasionally I like to use the pointer. So what we did a few years ago, we actually created what's called a shape file that's breaking down to a mapping file in something called ArcGIS that shows where your elementary attendance area boundaries are. And you can see the Mount Prospect zone, which is in the southwest corner of the township, is actually the smallest geographically of the 4 zones. So enrollment-wise, this has been really interesting, what's happened here. I came here 4 years ago, and your enrollment was really declining. If you look at the enrollment as this past October, just a month ago, your enrollment is 4,723 and half. That half is a shared time student. If you look at what it was 10 years ago, it was 5,703. You've lost almost 1,000 students over the last decade. And you might wonder why, and we'll talk about that tonight. So your enrollments really declined through the 21-22 school year before they stabilized. They've actually been pretty stable the last 2 years. There were large declines in 2020 and 2021, and this is not uncommon. We've seen this in districts across the state due to the pandemic. A lot of students either withdrew because they didn't want, maybe they were homeschooled or went to private school. They didn't want to go to a school that had hybrid or remote instruction. So then we also projected enrollments using something called the cohort survival ratio method. So here is your enrollment over time. You can see up there on the screen in the far right, you can see the stabilization in the enrollment that I'm talking about just in the last couple of years. That's a good thing. Because this next one is the one I'm going to try to wake you all up on. This is the most important slide of the night, if you ask me. This is showing your historic enrollments in the last 10 years by elementary, middle, and high school. The elementary is the one on the top. The one in blue shows that enrollments declined for elementary through the 2020-21 school year before it reversed trend. Now, that's important because those elementary cohorts, if you have now an increasing elementary cohort, those are now going to ripple through the system into the middle and high school. So eventually, over time, you should be able to see increasing enrollment at the middle and the high school, but it's going to take time. The middle school enrollment has also been declining through 2021 before it stabilized. At Ridge High School, which is the one in green in the middle, actually been a decline of enrollment for the last 7 years. Both of them, all 3 grade configurations have had large declines in enrollment. For instance, the elementary enrollment decline has been almost 500 students in the last decade. So how do we project enrollments? We use something called the cohort survival ratio method, which is approved by the state of New Jersey. And I'm going to give you a really simple example, just so you have an understanding of what we do. So if you have 100 first grade students in the 2022-23 school year, and they become 95 second graders in this current year, that's a survival rate or a grade progression rate of 95 over 100, which is 0.95. And we do these grade progressions from birth to kindergarten all the way up through 11th through 12th grade. There are 13 possible grade progressions, birth to K, K to 1, all the way on up. So if the values are above 1, you have inward migration, and if they're below 1, it's outward migration, you're losing students. And this little simple example I gave you up here, you lost 5 students in the net, so that's an outward migration, a net outward migration. So when we looked at your historical ratios, we did these computations not just for 1-2 years, we did it for a whole decade to see if there's any patterns. And then we usually take an average, say the last 4 or 5 years, and your average ratios, 8 of the 13 ratios were above 1.00, which means in the net, district-wide, you have inward migration. But the interesting thing about your district is all the ones that were above 1 were in the elementary and middle school grades. All the ones that were below 1 were in the high school grades, which usually makes sense to me because at some point in time there might be people who are going to private high schools in the area. So that's why it looks the way it does. There were 9 survival ratios in the 2020 school year that were the lowest value in the last decade, and that I attribute to the pandemic. Most districts I work with maybe had 3, tops 4 ratios that are the lowest in the last decade in 2020, but your district had 9. So when we go forward, we have to use the survival ratios. We take an average, and then we multiply those average ratios times your most current enrollment to get projections. We excluded 2020's ratios because it would just really underestimate your enrollments going forward. So you have a phenomenon here called negative kindergarten replacement, and their values in the last 9 years have ranged between 116.5 and 228.5 students. Really all it is, it's when the number of entering kindergarten students is less than the senior class that graduated the prior year. So if you have 400 seniors graduating, to keep your enrollment equal, you need 400 kindergarten students coming in the next year, provided no one leaves in the interior grades. But in general, you're not getting a kindergarten class big enough to offset what's leaving. So here's what the historical kindergarten replacements have looked like over time. As you can see, they've been quite negative and quite large. So when we looked at the relationship between negative kindergarten replacement with enrollment change, the kindergarten replacement is in gray and the enrollment change is in blue. What we saw was that, at least beginning in 2020, the blue bar, which has kind of got messed up in the importing of this document because that's not how it looks in the report. The blue bar, which is the 4th from the right, is bigger than the gray bar. You have a much bigger enrollment change that's negative in that year 2020 due to people leaving the district, outward migration. But take a look at the blue bars compared to the negative kindergarten replacement in the next 3 to the right. They're all less than that, which means you have inward migration offsetting the negative kindergarten replacement in the last 3 years, sometimes so much inward migration that you have an enrollment gain, which is really interesting. So what do we use BERTs for? BERTs are really critical because they help project kindergarten students 5 years later. We looked at the birth data from 2009 to 2021. We don't have any more recent data than that. But your birth counts declined through 2017 before they reversed trend. And if we look at the endpoint years, 2009 and 2021, you have 20 fewer births in 2021 than in 2009. And as a result, you've had declining kindergarten enrollment. You had 308 students in 2014, and as recent as 2022, 236. So here you're starting to see, let's put the pieces together. I told you at the outset you have a high median age here, 5 years older than the state average. So an older population, not having as many children for births, resulting in smaller kindergarten classes that are going to move through the system, causing your 1,000 student enrollment decline in the last decade. It all makes sense. We took the births by census block, which are a really small geographical area from the Department of Health, and we aggregated it by your elementary attendance zones to figure out how many births occurred in each one of the 4 birth zones, attendance areas. So here's what I'm talking about. You can see that births declined to about 141 in 2017, and it's been an upward trajectory since, which again is another indicator that things are about to change here. So when we look at how births are related to kindergarten students 5 years later, you can see I have the birth year on the left, the number of births in that year, how many kindergarten students come 5 years later, and then the survival ratio, which is just kindergarten students divided by births. And you can see they're all well above 1, which means that you're gaining a lot of students from other towns, born somewhere else, moving because they want to be educated here. This is typical for excellent school districts when you see those kind of survival ratios behind me. The pandemic year of 2020 was the lowest value in the last 10 years. It was 1.347. So when we look at births by attendance area, you can see there are differences. Mount Prospect has the lowest number of births if we add them up over the last 12 or so years, but the Liberty Corner area has had the most number of births. That unknown column on the far right means that we know that a mother from Bernards Township had a birth. We don't know her address, so we couldn't assign her into one of the attendance areas. But from proportional allocation, we did allocate them eventually into one of the 4 areas. So when we look at your births by census block in 2009, dark blue is showing where the greatest number of births have occurred. And it's been mostly down in the southern part of the township in the Liberty Corner area. And if we advance it to 2021, let's see what happens. There's no dark blue anymore. We've declined, it's the same scale, by the way, so that's why we kept it the same scale so you could see a comparison. But there really has been a decline in a lot of these census blocks over time. I'll just toggle back and forth and you can see them decline. And then if we aggregate the number of births over the last 12 years, the Cedar Hill area, the Liberty Corner area, and the southern part of the township have had the most births. So when we look at your age pyramid, the age pyramid is simply an age-sex diagram of the percentage of males and females by age class. This is from 2010, and what this is showing is males is in orange on the left and females are in green on the right. The biggest age class in 2010 for both males and females was 45 to 49. If we advance it to 2020, oh, by the way, notice this area right here. This area right here in the 20s and 30s, how few people you have, they can't afford to live here. High property taxes, high home prices, just not that many. So it's an older population. If we advance it to 2020, if everyone doesn't move and no one really dies, you would expect that the biggest groups would be 10 years up the ladder. In a case it was, males, the biggest group was 55 to 59, and females was 50 to 54. So when we look at how things have changed by age class numerically, this is basically just taking the 2 graphs you've seen and numerically taking differences. In blue, the biggest gainers in the last 10 years is the 20 to 24 group. And that's totally mind-blowing to me because I know how hard it is to live here, to buy a home. So are people coming back into mom and dad's basement to live? That was a question I thought, you know, because it's certainly not, can't afford to live here, 20 to 24. Notice in red, the biggest decliners were people in their 40s. But what's really interesting here, if you just isolate on the under 5, the 5 to 9 age group, and 10 to 14, if we aggregated the change for both males and females, there were big declines in the 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 to 14 age groups, which is your elementary, middle, and before school population. That's, over this 10-year period. It all makes sense, this declining enrollment, because you just don't have the kids. And where are the biggest gainers? If you aggregate the 55 and up population, every age group from 55 and up grew. So, it's just, again, a sequence of an older changing population. So as I mentioned, I did call the township to find out about new housing. Since our last study 4 years ago, Crown Court and the enclave at Dewey Meadows have been completed, but you still have a couple more. Mountain View, which is in the Liberty Corner, Attendance area of about 280 units. There are townhouses currently under construction. Sorry, the apartments are under construction, but the townhouses are not yet under construction. And then Minebrook Farm, which is a small 12 detached single-family home development off of Minebrook Road, where 10 homes have already been built. There is the potential for a development. You've probably heard of this, the Millington Quarry. Possible redevelopment. It's currently zoned for about 40 to 50 detached single-family homes, but the developer that has the property would currently like to rezone it to have multifamily housing like apartments or townhouses, but they have not approached the township yet to rezone it. So we did not include that in the study because that may or may not happen going forward. That's something to keep an eye on. So here's the locations of your two new housing developments, both in yellow up there, number 1 and 2. They're both in the Liberty Corner area. Historically, you really haven't had that much housing growth. The big numbers you see there are in Cedar Hill, which are the two developments I just mentioned, the enclave at Dewey Meadows and Crown Court. But all those other little small counts that you really see are just knockdowns or infill, which means just taking a home and building it on a vacant piece of land. So you really haven't had that much housing in the last 5 or 6 years. So we did compute how many children we would expect from detached single-family homes, apartments, and townhouses. Pretty high yield for what we call 1 to 4 family homes. In your community, it's mostly detached single-family. It's about 0.911 children per housing unit. Townhouses and condos is 0.298, apartments is 0.288, so you can see how much lower they are compared to detached single family. So based upon some of these values I'm showing here, we're estimating 106 additional children from those two housing developments. So this one just, again, this is in the report. I'm not going to go into any detail. We did a very intensive, in-depth research of every single housing development that's townhouses or condos, the sale price, the number of bedrooms, the year they were built, number of units. Then we checked your address database to figure out how many kids are in each one of these developments for elementary, middle, and high. We computed the student yield, and we compared it to the student yield we computed for you in our December 2017 study, which was 6 years ago, the first time we worked with you. And the biggest yields are in Hamilton Ridge and Patriot Hill. But if you look at the bottom right, these two values right here, these are the student yields in currently 23-24 is 0.298. Go back 6 years ago, it was 0.301. So it really hasn't changed much in 6 years. We did the same thing for apartments. You really don't have that much in the way of apartments. Now you have a Crown Court, which was really an extension of an existing Crown Court development from 1989. And the enclave at Dewey Meadows, which really has not had that many children, around 0.192. So we look at home sales as well. Home sales for the last 23 or so years, you can see that home sales really were strong in the mid-2000s, which is right in here. And then they declined in the housing market crash and banking crisis in 2008 or so. And then they've been going steadily up. Unfortunately, in the last couple years, you've been seeing a little bit of a decline again. And again, we're just expecting that to happen with the interest rates going up as high as they are. It's really hard to sell your home, which has a 3% mortgage, and go to one with 7.5%. It just doesn't work. So when we looked at your home sales by census block in the last 6 years or 5 years, the greatest number of sales, again, dark blue, is down in that Cedar Hill, Liberty Corner attendance area in the southern part of the township. So let's get to what you really want to know, enrollment projections. So again, we projected for a 5-year period. We projected at the school level. Enrollments are projected to decline only one more year, next year. And then we're projected to be fairly level for the next 4 years out. So if we look in 28-29, which is the end of the projection period, only a decline of about 65 students. But this is the second most important figure, I think, of all the ones I'd like you to look at tonight. This shows you the enrollment projections by elementary, middle, and high. You can see that in blue, in the far bottom left, blue is a gain, negative is red. We're actually projecting an enrollment gain at the elementary level due to that change in the birth rate. But middle school, nothing really much at Annan. But at the high school, a continued decline as these smaller elementary and upper elementary middle school cohorts finally move through the system. Eventually, that will clear itself out, but it takes time. So when we take a look at your enrollments and compare them to capacity, what's interesting is, first of all, I have to explain to you what capacity is. Capacity is something that's not a hard and fast number. It's not like this building here has a capacity of 1,000, cannot be exceeded. It's not a fire code capacity. It's based on how you are currently using the building. So in other words, if your school board policy has that, say in an elementary building, we will not educate more than 22 children in a classroom, you take that number 22 and you multiply it times the number of classrooms, and there's your capacity. But if you want to make a higher capacity, the board can change the policy and now have 25 children educated in the classroom instead of 22, and that would raise capacity. On the flip side, if you convert general ed classrooms, which have greater capacity, to small group instruction, such as gifted and talented, special ed, English language learners, that will also reduce the capacity. So this is not a hard and fast number. Those capacity values you see up behind me on the left for each school were from your long-range facility plan in 2019. I can't guarantee that that's exactly how you're using the buildings now. But when we compare the current enrollments for each building to what's going to happen in 5 years, you can see currently we have what's called unhoused students. That's the fancy word in the state. It really means inadequate seating at both Cedar Hill and Liberty Corner, more pronounced at Cedar Hill. And due to the increasing enrollment projected at Cedar Hill, predominantly due to the new housing that occurred at Dewey Meadows and Crown Court, there's going to be a greater imbalance in the next 5 years, as well as at Liberty Corner due to new housing that's projected there. As you can see, everything else remains blue on that table, which means you have surplus seating. Although you can see Mount Prospect is sort of at capacity now and is projected to be at capacity in 5 years. This is really a question for your building principals. Rather than looking at this sheet and say, yeah, we got red and we got blue, which means some are short and some we have surpluses, the building principals would tell you if it's really an issue or not. It's really something on the ground that would have a better feel. Lastly, tonight we did something called this housing turnover analysis. I mentioned it at the outset. It's something my colleagues at Berkeley developed. And what we do is it's a completely independent analysis. Instead of projecting students through the cohort survival ratio method, we project houses to project enrollment. And again, do not use this for the purpose of new facility plans or anything like that. You want to use the other one I mentioned. There are 3 inputs. Your housing turnover rates by length of ownership, your current distribution of homes by length of ownership, and your student yields by length of ownership. And I'll get into what each one of these mean. So first of all, we have to compute what's called turnover rates. Turnover rates are really the rates of which homes sell. So we took every single house in the township, parcel level data, to track each home through its life cycle. And all the data that we had contained the sale dates for each one of the homes, the sale prices, and the year the home was built. And we had sales data from 1989 to 2022. And basically what we're doing is we're following each home, each year's cohort of homes beginning in 1989 to see when they sell next. So I give you a simple example. If we have a home built in 1980 and it has 3 sale dates, 95, 98, and 2006, it's actually part of 3 cohorts. We can't really assume the first length of ownership is from 1980 to 1995 because we don't have sale dates prior to 1989. Maybe it was sold in 1984. So our first length of ownership is from 1995 to 1998. 3 years, and then from 1998 to 2006, and then 2006 to the present, which for us is 16 years because we only had data through 2022. So length of ownership is a very interesting thing. What we find is, you may find this hard to believe, is that really people do not hold on to their homes as long as you may think. This is showing you here that on the left-hand side is the turnover rate, which is the percentage of homes that sell in a cohort. And on the bottom is the length of ownership in years. And what it's showing you is that the highest turnover rates occur at the lowest lengths of ownership, around 1 or 2 years of ownership, which means people are selling because they want to make more money maybe on their homes, or they have to move for their job. It's really unclear. But at long lengths of ownership, way out here in the far right, 30 years out, the percentage of homes that are being sold are very, very low. So the current number of homes by length of ownership, this is your distribution as in 2022. The greatest number of homes that you have in Burns Township right now have only been owned 1 or 2 years. Then what we do is, this is what's called student yields by length of ownership. This is the number of children at each one of the length of ownership. We joined the student address database to the property database so we could tell how many students were at each length of ownership. And what we find out is the greatest number of students occur at about 5 years of ownership before it then starts to decline. As you can see, long lengths of ownership, they have educated out of the system, so there's not many children at long lengths of ownership. So the methodology is fairly simple. We take your current length of ownership, which was the slide two prior, and we take your historical turnover rates, and we're either going to advance the homes at each length of ownership 1 more year, saying they're going to continue on to another year of ownership, or we're going to sell them and bring them back down to 0 years of ownership. And we're using your average turnover rates from the last 30 years to make that calculation. Then we take the number of homes at each length of ownership and multiply it by the student yield at each length of ownership. And that gets us the number of children at each length of ownership for the next 5 years. When we sum it up, this is what we get. The top line is the number of children from detached single-family homes from this calculation. We then kept all the students from apartments, townhouses, condos as a fixed value because they're not part of this analysis, as well as your pre-K population. And what it's showing is in the next 5 years, if we just look at houses and do not look at new housing starts, if we do not look at birth rates and we just factor out all those other variables, your enrollment would decline due to housing turnover based upon the current distribution of homes that you have right now. So what does this all mean? It means that, look, you're not going to have an issue with housing turnover causing increasing enrollment in the township. That's not the issue. Other issues are going to be the new housing starts, the higher birth rates, things like that. COVID, real quick, I know I've been here a while, but I like to just give you a full breadth of what we did. COVID has had varied impacts across the country on enrollment. Big school districts had large declines. You can see some of them up there. New York City, who I work with, I think was 38,000 they lost. But people were leaving their metropolitan area homes to either live in second homes that they owned in maybe where I live in Vermont or somewhere else. And the question was, are they going to return to the metro area or not? And of course, remote work is the big hot ticket, hot button issue. I have a daughter who complains that she has to go to the office twice a week, and I kind of laugh when I hear that, but you know, that's the issue. You know, if you've got remote workers, they don't have to be tied to any location, and we saw a lot of people that left and never came back because of remote work. So when you look at how the USA's population changed from the year of the pandemic, around March 2020, which was April in this graph here, to July 2021, the biggest gainers in population are magenta, the biggest gainers are in green, and the largest decliners are in magenta. So the Rocky Mountain states gained the most people. The heartland of the country lost the most people. It's hard to see New Jersey, so I kind of blew it up for you right here. The areas that are dark up there were the biggest decliners after the pandemic, and yellow is the biggest gainers. So take a look at what you see. The Turnpike Corridor, Hudson, Bergen, Essex, Mercer, Middlesex, right down the gut. Those were the big decliners. The biggest gainer was Ocean County. You know what my theory is? right? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, exactly. Beach houses. People, Bergen County particularly have a high proportion of people who own at Long Beach Island, and that's in Ocean County. So there's a lot of that happen. Now, again, I'd like to look at this with more recent data to see if that's changed or not. The one way down the south, I think that's Cumberland. That was also a big decliner, but there could be other things going on there. So, summarizing tonight, you've had enrollment declining. Enrollment's been declining through 21-22, and it's started to stabilize. Looking ahead, we still project another decline next year in the pre-K to 12 population before it stabilizes. The biggest decline is really just right here in this building, projected at Ridge, as these existing smaller upper elementary and middle school cohorts finally move through the system. But we are projecting enrollment gains at the elementary level, basically for 3 reasons: increase in the township birth rate, this inward migration of people, which I talked about, which has been happening at the elementary level, and these roughly 300 new housing units that are planned. So with that, I will open it up to the board for questions. Yes, sir. Actually, it's a good question. So the question, if you can't hear, was regarding years 6 through 10, we do have some uncertainty in projecting enrollments like that. Could we take that enrollment gain from the elementary level, perhaps look at moving forward how that would impact, I guess, middle and high, right? And the answer is yes, because the middle and high school projections are based upon students who are either in the system or who have already been born. So those are the two that we could project. But elementary would be the one what I refer to as the cone of uncertainty. So yes, if you really wanted to, it would be fairly straightforward to project middle and high based upon that. And you can see that you would expect at some point an increase in Annan, some point increase in Ridge. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The Millington Quarry, you said, was zoned for 40 to 50 single-family detached homes. Do you have some idea of what that would be in terms of like what the developer said we want to do multifamily housing? Like, would that look something like Dewey Meadow based on like size of the area, like 280 multi kind of like space units?
That your guess would be as good as mine, because without putting a site plan forward to the planning board for approval, I have no idea. But you know, it probably would be my guess would be in a similar size as Dewey Meadows, 200 to 300 units. That would be my guess, because the density would increase. So it wouldn't be 40 or 50 attached homes or apartments. It's going to be in a magnitude higher. But what that is, I have no idea. I'm going to guess 2 to 50, 300 homes, apartments.
Okay, all right, thanks.
But that may never happen.
Right, yeah.
So thinking along the lines of the capacity, I know we're straining capacity at one of our elementary schools already, obviously, because of the Dewey Meadows, but with your data, could we get possibly like a heat map of where these students are, so that if we wanted to do some kind of maybe redistricting in the future, we would at least have kind of a scatter plot of where they are?
So, well, that wasn't something we were hired to do, but we do redistricting analysis. And what we do is take the enrollments for the last 6 years, we take all of your student addresses, we put them into this ArcGIS program and see where everybody is. And then with collaboration with the district's administration, they make recommendations, you know, based upon all these dots here, which are students. If we move this street here, there, and there, how would this look? It's definitely beyond what we've done, but it's something we could do if you wanted to go down that road somewhere in the future.
I know it's in the report. There's sections about special education students. Could you give us like a short summary of how that was factored into the overall population analysis of just looking at kind of like, you know, student people, right? And how you differentiated general education's population.
Sure. So for special education, first, let me take a step back. So our enrollment that we get is from the Department of Education, and they have a special education under a category called ungraded. So these are not students for pullouts that are spending 80% of their time in a regular ed classroom and just going out for special instruction 20% of the time. So there's a methodology based upon, if they're in special ed classes, I think more than 50%, then they become more in this ungraded population. I forget how it works, but so in our report, all the historical enrollment is shown by grade and by the ungraded population for the elementary, middle, and high. To project those counts going forward, we take a percentage. So in other words, if you have 20 students that are special ed in a student body in a school of 500 students, we're just taking that proportion and using an average, usually from 3 or 4 years going forward to compute what the special ed population would be. But it is all in there.
I just want to make sure that I understand, because I was here the last time. The last report, the end result was your enrollment is going down in X number of years. So this is very different because we've been talking about this as, well, our enrollment is going down, our enrollment's going down. And now I'm looking at this, and while middle school and Ridge might be stable temporarily, overall elementary is going up, and eventually will feed into middle school and Ridge. So WAMS and Ridge will not stay stable because they will continue. Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, I'm only projecting for 5 years, which is this one right here. So yeah, for the Annans, I've never heard it by WAMS. Is that what you called it? Okay. Yes, that's fairly stable. And as far as Ridge High School, yeah, declining enrollment. But you could see the way it works is that the gain started down below in the elementary and it's pushing through. That caused a stabilization at Annan, but it hasn't caused it yet at high school because eventually that has to keep going. So it's just a funnel going through. So if we came back here in about 4 years, my guess would be the Ridge High School would see a stabilization fairly similar to what you see at WAMS and an increasing enrollment at the middle school as well. Hard to say what would be at the elementary because the birth rates are only through 2021. I'm curious what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
But the overall takeaway is our enrollment is going up.
The big takeaway, so I want to that's what I was trying to point out at the beginning with this one slide. It's not the overall enrollment, it's at the elementary level. Because that's the one that's driving the future enrollment, is this slide right there. That last 3 or 4 points in that blue line is your elementary enrollment, and it's going to push through the system. That's the big takeaway tonight. So it's a big change in 4 years, the last time I've been here. I was very excited to come here and tell you this.
Any other questions from the board for Dr. Grip? Because he's good to go.
Back to snow country.
All right, thank you.
All right, quite welcome. Thank you. Oh. It's kind of fun. Thank you. You're quite welcome. Yes. We'll be in touch. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, oh, I know. Thanks. Take care.
Okay, thank you for the report. We're going to keep moving here. That brings us to superintendent's report. There are 2 items under superintendent's report. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. Light, Mr. Salmon, Mr. Markarian.
So thank you for that. Obviously, we have our HIB report for this board meeting, November 27th, and we have a field trip for the Ridge High School competition cheerleading team. This is their annual trip to Florida. So that is not a new thing, but because it's an overnight trip, it has to be board approved. And those are the only 2 voting items. A couple other comments, but if you want to vote first.
Okay, any questions on the 2 items? Ms. Rowland, roll call, please.
Mr. Salmon,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Light,
Yes?
Ms. Hira, Ms. McCune,
Yes.
Mr. Molinari,
Yes.
Mr. Amin,
Yes.
Ms. Chipak,
Yes.
and Mr. Rashio.
Yes. Mr. Markarian.
Thanks. Just wanted to plug for next week, we have a BT Connect meeting planned here at Ridge High School at 7 o'clock. This is on Monday, December 4th. We'll be taking a look at school start times and tiers for bus transportation. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware and invite you all to come out. It'll be at the Ridge High School cafeteria, not here. It's not a board meeting in the sense of action items at all. It'll be specifically to talk about school start times and bus tiers. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything for Mr. Markarian? Okay, that'll bring us to public comment on agenda items. If the public has anything to say about what's on the agenda this evening, please come forward, sign in, and speak your piece. Going once, going twice. Okay, public comment on agenda item is closed. That'll bring us to approval of minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Salmon, Ms. McCune? Any questions? Mr. Rollo?
Mr. Salmon,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Light,
Yes.
Ms. Hira,
Yes.
Ms. McCune,
Yes.
Mr. Molinari,
Yes.
Mr. Amin,
Yes.
Ms. Chipak,
Yes.
and Mr. Rashio.
Okay, that's going to bring us to Finance Committee report. There are 24 items under Finance. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. Light, Ms. McCune, Finance Committee report.
I was not able to get to it before the holiday, so I will report out next meeting.
Are there any questions on the items? Mr. Amin.
Item 8, where the ski transportation bids were too high, and we're not going with either one, what are we doing instead?
Yeah, so on number 8, our council let us know that there was deficiencies in the bids with awarding, but it's early in the season and we're going to rebid, and we have enough room underneath the bid threshold to go with these companies. We can do business with them up to the transportation bid threshold of $22,000. And after, to exceed that threshold, we would have to go out to bid. So we're going to contract with them for, probably between $6,000 and $10,000 worth of trips, go out to bid, and then hopefully they'll submit non-defective bids, and we'll be able to award at the following meeting.
Okay,
It
and
won't
we have time
result-
for that.
It won't result in an interruption of service, yeah.
Okay, and then for item 3, can you just give examples of line item transfers that added up to $106,000? Just big buckets, you don't have to go to details.
Yeah, we do lots of transfers throughout the year. If, somebody had extra money in a supply line and we want to move it to a purchase service line, each
Yeah, no,
type
I-
of service comes, so.
Are there-
we could pull
It's in the It's in the folder.
It's in the
line item transfers for October.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like additional special education costs, annual tuition rate, growth position, PALS aid.
Are there any over like 30, 40,000 specific ones that you can call
There
out?
are a couple.
Yeah.
And they're associated with special education tuition.
Special ed tuition,
Yep.
okay.
Those are the two significant ones that are driving 3/4 of that number.
Okay.
Any other questions on the items? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Rullo.
Mr. Salmon,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Light,
Yes.
Ms. Sierra,
Yes.
Ms. McCune,
Yes.
Mr. Molinari,
Yes.
Mr. Amin,
Yes.
Ms. Chipak,
Yes.
and Mr. Ruscio.
Yes.
Okay, that's going to bring us to personnel. There are 18 items under the personnel report. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. White? Ms. Light? Personnel Committee report.
Yep. So we met on November 17th. We discussed 3 or 4 topics, the BTBOE and the physics coverage. So there's a disruption being caused by an AP physics teacher who went out on leave unexpectedly in September. The administration has moved 2 AP courses that were impacted to existing staff, so there's 4 resulting enriched physics classes that needed coverage. There's temporary coverage being partially provided by the science supervisor and the WAMS instructional coach, who is a former science teacher. Students have access to other physics teachers at lunch. The committee discussed other ways to mitigate the lack of a full-time physics teacher for these 4 classes by potentially hiring a sub with a physics background certificate or reaching out to retirees. In the meantime, the position is currently posted, but there haven't been viable candidates. There's a good chance another member who's out on leave returns in January, but until then, there's somewhat of a known disruption going on with the physics class. To address this, for now, there's a supervisor covering the class for the second marking period. The committee recommended approving a stipend at 1.5 times the normal rate to account for 4 classes that are being overseen, but the supervisor is only being present for the equivalent of 1 class, 1/4 of the 4 classes. Administrative structure discussion, there will be a vacancy of an assistant principal position resulting from a resignation. The position will be posted and the plan will be to backfill the position. Responsibilities of the current combined AP WAMS AO position included more than half of the time of the position being designated for management of the WAMS AO program. Additionally, there was discussion about the lack of a dedicated PE health supervisor and whether or not adding an assistant AD or admin assistant to help the current WAMS AP would address that workload. These 2 options will be discussed in greater detail at the next Personnel Committee meeting. We discussed nursing services being provided by a third party currently for a specific student. Issues with the services may be addressed by hiring an in-house resource for approximately 2.5 years for this particular student. Savings would be realized by bringing the nurse in-house versus the current nursing agency, although I think there was a question about whether or not the pension costs were included. And then we reviewed the open vacant positions. That's a standing item.
Okay, any questions for personnel? Mr. Salmon?
The part about the AP WAMS AO position, did that tie back to the AP that's resigning, or is that was something separate?
I think it's all combined, but Mr. Morcarian, did you want to speak to that?
It's not the same. It's not the same one.
No, but I mean, like, what does the WAMS, the AP position, what does that have to do with it?
I was asking questions about it because I just wanted to know how it was going, with the assistant
Okay,
principal,
that's what
trying
it-
to
okay.
manage all of that. And, given all of our discussion, assistant principals, when we were talking about administrative structure. So we were just talking about what options there are, and whether it would make sense to look at the position in terms of the PE supervision. We have stipends for that. And, if there's other creative ways, to refigure. you know.
Well, so was
talk
the
about
original
them.
idea like that position would be 50% WAMS-AO and 50% AP?
Well, I guess now we found out it's at least 50% WAMSO, which is more than what we
Right,
were
okay.
hoping it would be, because we want them to be doing the
Well,
assistant
But one of
principal
the
stuff.
suggestions we did bring up during the meeting is that, you know, he's currently sharing a administrative assistant, so he has half administrative assistant. So if he had a full administrative assistant, we might be able to backfill some of his offload some of those responsibilities to his admin.
Mr. Mead?
That's it.
Any other questions? Okay, Ms. Roll.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rascio?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to bring us to policy. There are 2 items under the policy committee report. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Salmon, Ms. Light, and policy committee report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Molinari. So the policy committee met on Monday, November 6th. We had some discussion about the fact that there's a school threat assessment team policy that is under construction. I'm working with the administrative team. We want to add some additional details and forms to supplement the initial draft provided by our policy writing firm. So we're working on that, and we should have it done this winter. Over the next couple of policy committee meetings, we'll be bringing it back to the committee to get final approval. And then we use the remainder of our time to really talk about school start time issues. While not directly a policy, it obviously has implications on our schedule policy, our transportation policy. So we had some conversation just to take advantage of the fact that we allocate 2 hours for committee meetings, and we didn't need a full 2 hours to talk about the other policies. So just had some conversation back and forth about the different proposed schedules that I've since been communicating through the SOS Express. So I think people have a sense of that. And also, we created a section on the district webpage to share the information as well. So to be continued at the BT Connect meeting on Monday, December 4th for that topic. We had done the school district calendar. This is not the calendar policy per se, it's the actual 2026-27 school calendar. And that has to be done by December of each year going forward 3 years out. So we're looking at the 26-27 school year calendar, which had been previously provided to the board for comment. There were no additional comments beyond the changes we made after the first draft. So that is on for first reading tonight, that actual school year calendar. Second reading for that would be next month in December. And then we had no comments on a host of policies that are up for second reading tonight, which does include the school year calendar policy, not the school year calendar for 26-27. So just to try to avoid the confusion, the main change that we made for the school year calendar policy, P8210, was the addition of EID, which would start to be incorporated beginning the first new calendar that we're creating, 26-27.
Thank you. Any questions for policy? Okay, Mr. Rollo.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rascio?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to curriculum. There is one item under curriculum. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. White? Ms. Light? Curriculum committee report.
Curriculum committee met on November 1st. We discussed the Go Math program. There's a new proposal to replace the Go Math program with the Envision program. The Go Math program is ending in 2024. In anticipation of that, 2 summers ago, Mr. Culmer, the district supervisor of mathematics, and 12 math teachers looked at 7 different math programs for elementary math instruction. At the end of that summer, 3 programs were selected to be reviewed this past summer, with the Envision program being recommended to begin in the 24-25 school year. The staff preferred Envision because the student class books and workbooks provide ample space for students to show their work as opposed to Go Math, which had very narrow spaces. The staff preferred Envision because this allow the students to show their mathematical thinking and allow teachers to assess and facilitate student discourse. There are a number of resources available to support differentiation within the classroom in order to meet the needs of all learners. The teachers also liked that Envision was a little less word problem heavy than Go Math and is aligned with New Jersey student learning standards. One board member asked whether the Common Core is required. Mr. Holmer and Ms. Fox explained that Common Core is not required by the federal or New Jersey state governments. Common Core was a state-led effort to develop a common set of curriculum standards. 45 states have adopted the Common Core. New Jersey has adopted its own curriculum standards, which are similar to Common Core. The board member asked why students do not focus on classical math such as times tables. Mr. Colmer explained that at the elementary level, we want to explain mathematical concepts to students so they understand the input and output of computation. The board member asked if Envision would be better for students to have trouble with word problems. Mr. Colmer said that all of the current math programs are unfortunately heavy, or fortunately, I guess, depending on your view, on word problems. However, Envision is less so than Go Math. The board member asked whether it would be more cost-effective to purchase one set of books and provide copied handouts to students rather than purchasing books. Mr. Colmer said that the cost of labor and material would make the costs nearly equivalent. The same board member complimented the push-in lessons provided by Quest teachers. One board member asked whether instructional and/or supplemental resources can be provided in different languages for multilingual learners. Mr. Colmer explained that there is a Spanish version of the book set, and students can be provided with translation dictionaries that can assist in understanding mathematical vocabulary. One board member asked whether the Envision program provides additional practice assessments that mirror the assessments the students take, for example, more word problems as opposed to those found on the IXL platform, which is more computational. Mr. Colmer explained that teachers are currently rewriting/modifying assessments in our current program, Go Math, to reduce the complexity of the word problems and focus more on testing the mathematical concepts. After the first year of implementation of Envision, the teachers will have a better understanding of which modifications should be made going forward. The board member also asked whether any of the assessments for Envision would be digital. Mr. Colmer explained that there are no digital assessments happening in math at the elementary level except for 5th grade, in which students do all their work with pencil and paper, but enter answers into Chromebook. The board member asked why 5th grade is the only grade doing this, and it was explained that it's for ease of grading, but teachers review all work submitted by students when reviewing the assessments. Student materials will be available for review in the board office. In terms of discussion items, the first was the update on the elementary scheduling professional development. Last month, administration and staff explored vendors and tools to identify alternatives to the current elementary schedule, which could find times to provide individual or small group instruction to students during the school day. Other potential benefits may include alternate scheduling options for our special area programs, as well as our push-in and pull-out programs, such as instructional support. The staff selected Velez as the vendor and Adario as the software scheduler. Genesis is used for assigning students to classes, whereas Adario is about scheduling all aspects of the elementary school schedule and can assist the district in using time more creatively and increasing the accountability of the elementary school schedule. Genesis is utilized in this way at the secondary level, but currently does not include the same features that meet the needs of elementary scheduling. The vendor will audit the current elementary schedule and provide advice and recommendations about the possibilities of modifying the schedule. The cost of the vendor and software is about $18,500, which is being funded by the ESSER 3 grant fund, which must be spent in full by June 30th, 2024. We discussed high-impact tutoring. 88 students from grades 3 through 5 were invited to participate. These are all students in instructional support and some additional students recommended by principals. 27 students said yes to the program. The tutoring began on November 1st, and the district is continuing to work to accommodate scheduling conflicts. The costs of the program are meant to be covered by the recently announced high-impact tutoring grant from the state, which, can I say, we didn't get, right? That's fine. So it counts out of the bag. We didn't get it.
We're still trying, but it doesn't look good.
Okay, so it's TBD whether we'll get the high-impact grant.
It's unlikely.
Nevertheless, we are providing the tutoring, and we are funding it with ESSER 3 funds. There were, Ms. Fox provided the report on student course schedule changes for the 23-24 school year at Ridge High School. It was about kids withdrawing, moving up and down from honors to AP to CP. There was a few charts and some explanation further in the minutes. The last 4 departments to review their summer curriculum updates. provided explanations to the committee. Visual and Performing Arts was reviewed by Mr. Fackelman. Science and TEDx was reviewed by Mr. Miziak. Special Education was reviewed by Ms. O'Connell, Ms. Reed, Ms. Orr, and Ms. Vitale. World Languages was reviewed by Ms. Stadler. And the next meeting is Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for curriculum? Okay. Seeing none, can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Ms. Light?
Yes.
Ms. Hira?
Yes.
Ms. McCune?
Yes.
Mr. Molinari?
Yes.
Mr. Amin?
Yes.
Ms. Chipak?
Yes.
And Mr. Rascio?
Yes.
Okay, on to wellness. No report this evening?
No, because we're meeting on Thursday.
Brings us to facilities and operations.
I'll have to report on both next meeting.
Okay. Any liaison committee reports? Okay, nothing tonight. All right, moving right along. That brings us to public comment on non-agenda items. Anybody has anything they'd like to say, please come forward, sign in, and speak your piece.
Good evening. I'm Emily Jones, Cedar Hill School, 100 Peachtree Road. Just a couple of little things. I was a little confused by that last report, Mr. Salmon, because I am a Quest teacher and I have nothing to do with math. That I feel like that was like the old school Quest, where like that was all combined, but just whoever that board member was, please know Quest and math are now separate. The most important reason, though, I'm here is because of the increased population at Cedar Hill. And I just want to make sure that you all are aware that we are drowning. And I'm going to try to say this without crying. It's exceptionally difficult to leave every day trying to comfort my colleagues who are crying because they can't help their students the way that their students need to be helped. We have 571 students. We have the same amount of support as far as lunch leaders and guidance as Oak Street, which has at least 100 less students. I do not understand how we can send the message to Cedar Hill families that those kids are just as important and just as safe and just as cared for and just as important as the kids at Oak Street who are getting the exact same number of adults caring for them, watching them at recess, helping them at lunch, offering them guidance classes. I am begging as an employee. I am also a member of our community. I am begging for 2 new lunch leaders for Cedar Hill and a second full-time guidance counselor. You gave us Castle. Castle recommends 1 adult for 250 students. We have 571 students. We have 98 kindergartners with 2 adults that watch them at recess. That's embarrassing. Please, I know we've tried to be creative, and I know we've tried to be patient, and I know we've tried to think outside the box with this. It's done. It's the end of November. Please help our kids. Please help our teachers. Please give us 2 more lunch leaders and a full-time second guidance counselor. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Hughes. I live at 434 Lyons Road, but I can safely say I spend majority of my time at 101 Peachtree at Cedar Hill Elementary. I had to laugh when our presenter used the words such as inadequate seating and greatest imbalance at Cedar Hill. I've been an educator for 18 years, 13 in this district, and this is the largest class I have ever had teaching in any state. Trust me, I love my 26 kids. In fact, they are amazing. But what's not amazing is the 26 desks that they need, the 26 chairs that they need, and the 26 cubbies that they need. because they are large. The furniture is large. The kids are large. We don't fit in the classroom. If our classes need to be this large, I'll do my job and I love them and I would take more kids if I had a bigger space. We need to consider everything they need. Some of my colleagues still don't have cubbies for all the students in the class. We also need to consider the support that these students need. Maybe it's instructional support, maybe it's lunch leaders, it's definitely guidance counselors, and it's definitely materials. I'm as local as you can get. Growing up in this town, when I started in kindergarten, there were 4 kindergarten classes in this entire town. So I promise you, I've watched this town grow, and I know what growing pains look like and feel like. I lived through a changing and redistricting was miserable for many families at that time. I don't know what it would look like for our town, but I can only assume that it would feel like moving something from one school to another and still not increasing staff. I hope that we consider that we need to increase staff, increase support, increase materials, increase furniture, and increase everything that our students need as our numbers grow. Thank you so much.
Anybody else for public comment? Okay, public comment is closed. Mr. Markarian.
So certainly it's no surprise that we have a lot of growth in Cedar Hill School. We are managing, as you heard, it's a challenge, especially in certain situations where class size is big and space is small. So I appreciate the teachers coming out and sharing tonight, and I look forward to speak to Ms. Euler to brainstorm what we can do. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to board forum. Anybody have anything to discuss?
I got a question there. So
Mr. Rusher.
in regards to the last comment, how did we get so off balance at Cedar Hill? And I'm assuming that this problem just didn't happen overnight. So why wasn't it staved off or addressed earlier?
Or are you talking about the population growth or the staffing issue?
The staffing issue.
Well,
Like the population didn't just go to
staffing,
500.
it was brought to personnel, a request to add another elementary counselor, and the board chose not to do that. And there was a request for lunch leaders, which I don't know what the status of that, Mr. Syatt?
Yeah, correct. So in the last, 6 months, we brought the floater guidance counselor for discussion, right? So it was going to be a shared counselor, and it was going to assist at Cedar Hill, of course. And then there was discussion about a lunch leader. We had talked about it at Personnel Committee last month. It doesn't work to take a lunch leader from another building, so I talked to Ms. Euler about getting creative and using our daily floater subs that we have to help us during lunchtime, which we're doing as a triage method right now, but I do think we have to come back with another request for a lunch leader, and I anticipate doing that again in December with some more data.
Sean, remind me, didn't we have a counselor that's unexpectedly out, and that's why the floater was assigned full-time?
So we have, so our current floater is backfilling, doing an amazing job at Cedar Hill right now, and the counselors on leave will return. That person goes back to, what's that? Yeah, that's right, just came back. So that person will return to the floater position, but the request last year was for a second floater. Yeah, and for now, that's on hold. We're not asking for that at this time.
Yeah, so can we assign the floater more often to?
Yeah, I
Cedar
talked to
Hill?
Ms. Euler just last week about this
Okay.
very issue, that the lunch leader and the counselor, there were ideas, and that discussion with her about using our floater sub was an immediate fix to address the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Well, wasn't there also discussion about teachers over the summer, about requests to add more elementary teachers? So I feel like there have been requests that were not, followed up on.
Well, we did hire additional teachers for Cedar Hill this year. We did do that to the point where we basically used every classroom that was available. We added 2 more teachers for Cedar Hill School to try to navigate the increase in the enrollment. And although it is high, I mean, we've seen enrollments at Cedar Hill of over 600 students over the past 15 years. So The number that we're at now, yes, we're at a full house, but the house has been fuller.
Mr. Mead.
2 points. One, for the lunch aid, I thought moving one from Oak Street to Cedar Hill was discussed it doesn't make sense to me to have the same number of lunch aids with a school that has 100 fewer students. So I thought when we looked at it, if we had moved one from Oak Street, they would all have one lunch aid per 80 to 85 students.
That's part of what I was going to share with you in December. It doesn't work because of the way lunches are scheduled at each of the elementary buildings. It winds up shorting certain grade levels where they only have one adult watching them. Miss Foley and I had an email exchange about this, so I have information to share with the personnel committee in December that'll at least shed some light on why that probably won't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we should talk about that. And then just on the number of classrooms, I think we had looked at the average class size and the max class size at each of the schools. They didn't seem to be far off based on the hiring plan that we talked about over the summer, but maybe we should just share that so everybody sees it again.
I think what's unique about the situation, and Mr. Markarian referenced it, it's not the number of students, and yes, it's high at Cedar Hill, but I think the staff, what they're getting at is it's the unique social and emotional needs that we're seeing with our students that we weren't seeing at our high water mark 10, 15 years ago, whatever it might be attributed to, right? We've talked about it up here, whether it's COVID, social skills needing improvement. The guidance counselors are seeing a lot more needs, a lot more lunch requests, or lunch group requests, social groups. I know our counselor there is triaging, right, trying to work with lots and lots of students there, socially, emotionally. So I think that's what you're hearing is requests for more counseling services, and then why you're hearing about lunch aid is more behavioral issues on the playground, more student-to-student confrontations, not violent, but more confrontations that need more supervision there. And that's why you're hearing those requests, not for teachers necessarily, because we did address that. Yes, class sizes are a little high, but that's not unusual when you look at high water mark over 610, 15 years ago.
Ms. White.
I also think if you're just looking at numbers, that doesn't give you the picture, because numbers don't equate to needs. So there might be fewer students over at Oak Street, but we don't know what the needs of the students are during their recess and during their lunch. So while yes, there might be tremendously more students at Cedar Hill, pulling a lunch aid from Oak Street could have devastating chain reaction there because we don't know what they do and what their students, we moved a lot of special education programs over there, and one of the things that is so wonderful is that it gives an opportunity for kids to be integrated during lunch and recess. Well, you're going to need more supervision during those times. So to pull somebody because they have simply fewer numbers doesn't address, but they might have greater needs. And I'm a big proponent, I sit here all the time and I say we need to be more proactive and not reactive. I said it last year, I said it this fall in terms of guidance counselors. And I am definitely frustrated to be hearing, here we are again in this position where we are being told the kids' needs are not being met. And I'm thrilled that we'll talk about this at the next meeting, but this could have been averted if 2 meetings ago when we talked about lunch aids, if we could have agreed, yes, we needed to do this. So I would like to encourage us to look at this all moving forward and be more proactive and not be waiting on having all the data and all the metrics, because sometimes you just have.
But we do who's doing what where and figure out what the right number is based on the needs.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is I'm not one for ignoring numbers, which is what I'm hearing otherwise. And if we're going to be that quick to add staff when there's an increased number of enrollment, we should be as quick to decrease staff when there's a decrease in enrollment. Otherwise, you are constantly just adding, and it's at the cost of having bigger class sizes, not having an AP physics teacher, not having enough services, and those things get just ignored by trying to solve these one-off situations. So I think you have to look at it holistically.
Ms. McKeon.
I kind of have to disagree with what you guys just said. I think I've been on the board for a really long time, and I think our administrators have always come to us with requests when they really, really need them, and they're listening to people in the buildings. If they say they really, really need lunch aides or they need another counselor, it doesn't mean they're never going to take someone away or when the population goes down. And so I feel like they do manage when, there's decreasing enrollment, like at the high school now, and with class sizes. I mean, there have been lots of, it's not like we only add people. There's been lots of retirements or, people that left the district that didn't get backfilled because of declining enrollment in certain subject areas. So I don't feel like we're just constantly adding staff. So I do have a concern when we're hearing, especially when it's about kids' wellness or safety at lunch or something, a request for, staffing. This wasn't for like a, like frills kind of elective class or something. And I feel like if we're going to do an analysis of the numbers, we should. But, if there's a like sort of a emergent, request, we should just do it while we do the analysis. Like fill the position because they're saying they really need it, do the analysis, and then maybe next year there's a way to reconfigure or move people around, but not in the middle of the year.
I think, we look to backfill and figure out how to get through the short term while the district is doing the analysis. Because again, who knows what's going on at other schools, at WAMs, maybe there's a staff that's being completely underutilized and can be leveraged for one of these sources so that we're not increasing the budget. We're providing every school with what they need, every child with what they need. We don't know. So I think that the approach we should take is let's get a plug in, even if it's a temporary position, and it's being marketed as a temporary position until we have the time to evaluate whether we're adding to the budget to it.
Ms. White.
I mean, I think any lunch aide or recess aide person that we would put in place from this point to the end of the year is temporary. So I think we can all agree on that. My issue is the needs aren't being met. And we just had the demographer come who told us that our enrollment's going up, and particularly Cedar Hill is going up. So we know that this is not going to be, gone next year or the year after. There's rising enrollment. And, while we're waiting on that data, there are children that aren't being supervised. There are accidents that can happen. It only takes one child. I'd rather err on the side of safety. Let's get somebody in place, even if it's temporary. I don't want you taking somebody from Oak Street to move to Cedar Hill, or taking anybody from Liberty Corner, or taking anybody from Mount Prospect, though, who is supposed to be doing their lunch and recess, because I think, okay, that's great, then we'll just have a problem at this other school. So whatever you can do to find help for Cedar Hill, I think we need to move forward on.
I think we need to look at our district holistically. I think I took a different read from the demographer's report than you just said, because our net students in 5 years, in 2028, is projected to be lower. Yes, it's projected to be higher at the elementary, but when you asked if you can project further out from that, you can't, because the statistics, it just doesn't bear out past 5 years. So I don't think we're going to need to be staffing right now for 5 years from now. I get what you say, where like a lunch aide or someone like that can be temporary. I think bigger fixes like guidance counselors, we should look at the district as a whole. And if we have to deploy from other schools, use district resources to help Cedar Hill, kids should absolutely get what they need. But I think the demographer's report is actually showing us flat or shrinking a bit as in the district as a whole. Beyond 5 years, you can't project. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we're staffing our more permanent positions, to include things like administration and teachers and counselors, and deploy them where they're needed at Cedar Hill, and look at the district holistically as far as resources are concerned. Ms. Chipek.
Yes, I was also going to add that my reading was that the high school is going to, so in 5 years, the high school is going to, the prediction was lose 179. The WAMS school is going to lose another 9. And from this 280 units improvement, housing units, we are going to receive 124. So my reading was that actually we would need 140 additional units to be built in 5 years just to keep the current student numbers in our school district. It's great that the trend is not all the way just negative, but all in all, holistically, we would need more students and more housing units just to replace.
Mr. Salmon.
We did adopt the Castle frame. I'm just talking about guidance counselors right now at the elementary level, right? We have our full complement of 5 working right now, right, Sean? Elementary guidance counselors, everybody's back, 5. Okay, so we have 2,000 kids at the elementary level. So we have 1 counselor per 400 kids, right? Yes, if you look at our district as a whole, we're close to the Castle guidance of 1 counselor per 250 kids, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? Like, you still need an extra, even you bring on an extra counselor at the guidance the elementary level, we have 6, we're down to 1 per 300 and change. So I don't know that there's, I understand the concept of looking holistically, but that would assume that some area at the middle school or high school is under capacity, which we have no evidence of. Nobody's coming to us and saying, you know, there's 2 guidance counselors at WAMS that are doing nothing, so bring them down to Cedar Hill. What we do have is Cedar Hill or the elementary level in general saying we have 1 guidance counselor per 400 kids. And even if you bring on somebody else, that's just going to get us to 300 kids, 1 per 300 kids. So we're still, you know, getting closer to the Castle guidance that we've adopted, but we're not there yet. So I know that in the beginning of the year, there was a request to add a guidance counselor, but it was pending more data. I don't know that was, I don't know what data that, other than these basic numbers, what data was necessary to make that decision, and then it never came out or came to fruition, so it kind of like got put on ice. I'm not sure why. It wasn't really reported out that there was a follow-up discussion, and I don't know that you need really anything more than that minimum 250, 1 counselor per 250 to know anything else. What more do you need? So why aren't we filling that position now?
Mr. Amin. Anybody else?
Also, my next question is, can we post that position, or can we put that back on the personnel agenda for the next meeting to see where we stand with guidance counselors at the elementary level, and are we meeting the Castle framework at that level? I understand the district as a whole argument. To me, that doesn't hold any water, because I think if you broaden out the scope of your lens, you can always find some average that'll work out. But for that level of our school district, why aren't we meeting that, and what can we do to meet that 1 counselor per 250 kids?
Mr. Salmon, so I think what we talked about when we brought this up is actually last year when we talked about data. I had actually said what you're going to hear is not numerical, empirical data. It's going to be anecdotal data that Ms. Smith would share. What I'd like is, and I'd have lots of conversations with her about this already. I think it'd be really helpful if she could come to the December 15th committee meeting to talk and share her input, because I think while there's definitely support for it, I also think the board needs to hear from her. She has a lot to share on this, and I don't know that now is the right time to add a counselor, and there are reasons. Some of it's programmatic, and I think also some of it has to be thoughtful, and some of it is just a product of it being not the right time to hire. Throwing somebody in right now is a triage. I think having that counselor back at Cedar Hill and using the counselor that was there primarily at Cedar Hill so that that person's there more than the other 3 buildings. And it makes sense because of the population, but Ms. Smith will share. I think there's more of a long-term goal around this additional counselor growth, and she has had discussions with Ms. Euler about this specific issue that I think the committee should hear and that they could then report out at that next board meeting. So I'd ask if you could indulge us, have that conversation at the 15th and then report out, and then we can make a decision about posting in the new year. I just don't think it's the right time to post something right now without Ms. Smith at least weighing in.
Yeah, no, that's fine, as long as there's some sort of plan, because the last time it was metrics, right?
Yep.
What metrics do we have? So the basic metric for Castle is 1 counselor per 250 kids. So starting with that, then there's anecdotal data from Mrs. Smith about what the counselors are doing, what the needs they're seeing, and how we're tracking that. So that's fine. I mean, I'm not telling you to post something if you don't think it's the right time, but like, we already know what the minimum is. So why should we be, allowing that to continue, not fulfilling that minimum?
Ms. White?
I was just saying, before you know it, we're going to be upon budgeting season. So I think it's great if you can have her come in December, because if in fact we do need to budget for this for the next school year, we need to start having these conversations.
I think in general, we knew we were going to have to readdress personnel based on the demographer's report for budget season, and that was something that was discussed in finance. So we did a preliminary budget with what we need related to personnel, and it was something that was going to be readdressed in finance based on recommendations.
Anybody else? Any other topics? Motion to adjourn? Ms. Light? Mr. Rascio? All in favor? All right, adjourned. Thank you, everybody.